By noon, Red Rock Ridge had stopped sounding like a town. No wagon wheels creaked. No pump handle groaned. No children chased dogs through the dust. The whole place lay still under the white sun, with its boards warped, its wells dry, and its troughs split open like old lips. Clara Vale stood beside the public pump with a tin dipper in her hand and one clean swallow left in her canteen. The pump had given nothing since dawn. Not a cough, not a spit, just the dry scrape of iron teeth. Across the street, Mayor Gideon Croft leaned in the shade of the mercantile porch, his thumbs hooked in his vest, his hat clean as a preacher's lie. Behind him stood men who still had barrels in their cellars, men who had locked their gates, men who smiled less with their mouths than with their eyes. Then the stranger came out of the flats. At first he looked like heat bent into the shape of a man, then boots, then shoulders, then a face darkened by sun and sand with beard stubble thick along his jaw and a long scar cutting down beside one eye. He carried a saddle, not over a horse, over himself. The thing sat across his shoulders like a dead animal, heavy with wet leather, gone stiff, one stirrup knocking against his ribs with every step. His shirt was torn at the sleeve. His lips were cracked black at the middle. Dust had dried in the corners of his eyes. He stopped at the pump. The town watched him breathe. He put one hand on the iron handle, tried it once. Nothing. Gideon's smile opened slow. Lost your horse, friend. A few men laughed. The stranger turned his head. His eyes moved from face to face, not begging, counting. Water, he said. The word came rough, bent with a mountain sound none of them knew. The ER dragged too hard. The T broke too sharp. Say that again, Gideon said, stepping off the porch. The stranger swallowed. His throat worked like it had gravel in it. Water. The laugh came harder this time. Lord help us, Gideon said. A foreign lunatic walked clear out of the devil's pan carrying his tack. A boy near the hitching rail snickered. One of the cattlemen spat brown juice into the dust. The stranger did not lower the saddle. He only looked at the pump again. Gideon walked close enough for his shadow to touch the man's boots. This town don't feed fools. It don't water 'em neither. The stranger's fingers curled once around the saddle horn. Clara felt the dipper handle bite into her palm. Her own trough at home was dry. Her last heifer had gone down that morning, with her nose in the dust and her ribs moving like bellows. Gideon held her note. By sunset tomorrow, maybe sooner, he would come with papers and men and that clean hat. She looked at the canteen. One swallow. Enough to wet her tongue. Not enough to save a beast. Not enough to save land. Not enough to save anything. The stranger turned to leave. His left knee bent wrong just a little. He caught himself before he fell. The saddle creaked across his shoulders. Clara stepped forward. The laughter thinned. She crossed the street, pulled the cork with her teeth, and poured the last of her clean water into the tin dipper. It rang small and thin in the metal. Gideon's eyes cut toward her. Miss Vale, he said, charity is a fine thing when a woman can afford it. Clara held the dipper out. The stranger looked at her hand first. Then her face, no smile. No thanks. Just a long look steady enough to make the dust and the town and Gideon Croft seem smaller for a breath. He took the dipper. He drank every drop, not fast, not greedy, like a man taking an oath. When he lowered it, one bead of water clung to his cracked lower lip. He wiped it with the back of his hand and turned his eyes on Gideon. No word passed between them. Still, Gideon's jaw shifted. The stranger walked past Clara. At her dry wagon trough split down the middle beside the feed store, he stopped. He reached into a leather pouch tied beneath the saddle flap and took out a stone. Round, smooth, black-gray, wet. A cold shine ran over it in the sun. Green moss clung thick along one side. Clara's fingers went slack around the dipper. No moss had lived in Red Rock Ridge for months. The stranger set the stone inside her broken trough, as gentle as laying down a child, then lifted the saddle higher on his shoulders and walked back toward the dead flats. Behind him, the moss dripped once into the dust. By the next morning, Clara's yard had turned the color of bone. Dust lay over the porch boards, over the empty hen crate, over the rope bucket hanging dead in the well mouth. The wind dragged grit against the windows, fine and dry, like a file working at glass. The mossy stone still sat in her split trough. Clara had touched it 3 times before sunrise. Each time it was cold. Not cool from shade. Cold like creek water running under mountain rock. She had no reason for it. No use for it. No time for wonder. Her last barrel had been rolled away at first light. 2 of Gideon Croft's men had come with a wagon and a paper stamped by the town council. They took the flour sack from her store shelf, the lamp oil, and the last coil of new rope meant for repairing fence. For debt against supply, one man had said, not meeting her eyes. Clara stood in the doorway with her shotgun across both hands. The men looked at the gun, then at the empty yard. Then they kept loading. By noon, Gideon came himself. He rode a red gelding fat enough to shame the whole valley. Its bit shone silver. Its hooves were clean. Behind him came 3 men and a clerk with ink on his cuffs. Gideon did not tie his horse. He let it crop at the dry weeds near Clara's gate. He held out a folded paper. "Sunset," he said. Clara did not take it. The paper brushed her knuckles. By county record, by signed note, by failure of payment, this property passes into my keeping at day's end. Her thumb slid along the shotgun stock. A splinter entered the skin beneath her nail. She did not pull it out. Gideon leaned down from the saddle. "You had land. You had cattle. You had your chance. Ain't no shame in knowing when a thing is finished." A fly crawled along the corner of his horse's wet eye. Clara looked past him, past the fence toward the white road running to town. Nobody came down it. No neighbor. No hand. No old friend of her father's. Just heat. Then she saw a man standing by the broken water trough. The stranger. The saddle was gone from his shoulders. He had come quiet as a shadow laid flat by noon. His hat brim hid half his face, but the scar beside his eye showed pale under dust. His boots were split at the toes. One hand rested on the mossy stone. Gideon turned in the saddle. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. The saddle ghost found himself a widow's yard. The stranger looked once at Clara, then walked to the bare patch before her porch steps. He lifted his right boot. With the toe he drew a line in the dust. Not a child's mark. Not idle scratch. A hard line, sure and clean, running north. Then another. Then a hook. Then small cuts down the side spaced like teeth. Clara stepped closer. Blacktooth Mountain. There it was in dirt. The long ridge. The broken western face. The dry wash. The old mule trail her father had told her never to ride. The stranger pointed to the mountain, then to the trough, then dragged his boot through the dust in a crooked path that turned behind a high spur and dropped into Clara's land. Away down. Away for water. Clara's breath caught halfway in her chest and stayed there. The clerk laughed once, small and mean. "What's he doing?" The stranger crouched and pressed 3 fingers into the dust where the ridge narrowed. Then he struck the ground twice with his knuckles. Stone. Hollow stone. Clara's grip loosened on the gun. Gideon's smile left his mouth. He touched his spurs to the gelding. The horse lunged forward. "Mind yourself," Clara snapped. Gideon rode straight across the drawing. Hooves tore through the ridge, crushed the crooked line, ground the finger marks into loose dirt. The whole map vanished under iron shoes and red dust. The stranger did not move. The horse stopped so close that foam from its bit flecked his shirt. Gideon looked down at him. "Ain't no man losing land over boot scratches made by a deaf foreign fool." Clara raised the shotgun. Two of Gideon's men raised theirs faster. For a long second, no one breathed. Then Gideon took off his hat and wiped his clean brow. "Sunset," he said again. He wheeled the gelding, and its hind hoof stamped the last unbroken mark into nothing. When they rode out, Clara looked at the yard. Only scuffed dust remained. Bastian stood over it, with both hands hanging open at his sides, staring at the ground where the road to salvation had been. Clara went inside before her knees gave out in the yard. The kitchen was hotter than the porch. Heat sat under the low ceiling and held there thick with the smell of old ash, dry beans, and pine boards gone thirsty. A bluebottle fly beat itself against the window, striking the same pain over and over, never learning. The debt paper lay on the table where Gideon's clerk had left it. Her father's table. Knife marks cut across the top from 20 years of bread. One corner had a burn from the winter Clara was 12 and knocked over a lamp trying to read after dark. Her mother's initials were still carved under the edge where no guest ever saw them. By sunset, Gideon Croft would own even that. Clara set the shotgun on the table. The barrel rolled and stopped against the paper. Her hands opened and closed once. The splinter under her thumbnail throbbed with each beat of blood. She tried to pull it free with her teeth missed and left a red smear across her lip. The door creaked. Bastian stood in the frame. For the first time, he did not look worn down by sun or dust or the weight of any saddle. His shoulders were square. His eyes were fixed on the table, then the paper, then Clara's hand on the gun. He crossed the room. Clara lifted the shotgun by an inch. He stopped. For one breath, there was only the fly at the window and the dry tick of the wall clock. Then Bastian pointed at the paper. Clara looked down. The word forfeiture stared back at her in black ink. Bastian's mouth tightened. He stepped forward, snatched the paper off the table, and flung it to the floor. Clara's fingers locked around the shotgun. "That paper is law," she said. Bastian looked at her as if she had just called a buzzard a judge. He turned to the pantry shelf. There sat the last flour sack. Clara moved before he touched it. "No." He put his hand on the sack. "That is all I got left." His eyes did not soften. He tore it open. White flour spilled across the table in a pale rush. It ran into the knife cuts, dusted the shotgun stock, floated in the hot air like mill smoke. Clara grabbed his sleeve. He shook her off. Not rough. Final. Then he put both hands in the flour and began to build. He pulled the powder up into ridges, pressed it down into flats, dragged the side of his hand through it, and raised a long, broken spine that ran from one end of the table to the other. Blacktooth. Not the rough mark Gideon's horse had ruined. This was the mountain itself. Clara leaned closer. He pinched two sharp peaks, cut the mule trail with one finger, dug out the dead wash. Then he took the tin cup from the shelf, poured the last cloudy water from the bottom into his palm, and let 3 drops fall into the flour. The flour darkened. He drew a deep, crooked groove from the high ridge under a folded spur, down toward the place where Clara's land would be. He slapped the table once. The flour jumped. Then he drove his thumb beneath the ridge and broke a hidden tunnel open. Water. Not over the mountain. Through it. Clara stared until the room seemed to pull in around that white map. The fly stopped beating the glass and crawled along the sill. Bastian reached into his pouch and set the mossy stone at the end of the groove. Then he pointed to the window. Outside, the sun had begun its drop. Clara looked at the paper on the floor, then at the table covered in her last bread, then at Bastian. His face said nothing kind, nothing soft. It only held steady hard as the stone he had carried out of the dead flats. Clara picked up the shotgun. She took the powder horn from the peg, the cartridge pouch from the nail, and her father's old field coat from the chair. At the door, she stopped and looked once at the kitchen. The flower map lay white across the table, a whole future bought with the last thing she had. She nodded. Bastian blew out the lamp, and together they stepped into the dark road toward Blacktooth. They reached Blacktooth after midnight. The mountain rose out of the dark with its broken teeth cutting into the stars. No tree grew on its face. No grass held to its slopes. The rock was black in some places, yellow-white in others, and sharp enough to skin a hand clean if a person slipped. Clara's boots had filled with sand 2 miles back. Each step ground grit between her toes and leather. Her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. The shotgun strap had rubbed a raw line across her shoulder, and every breath tasted of old dust and metal. Bastian climbed ahead without looking back much. He did not waste movement. He touched stone, waited, listened, then chose a path where Clara saw no path at all. Once, when she stepped wrong, his hand caught her wrist before shale slid out from under her heel. His fingers were cold, strong, gone before she could speak. Near the ridge, the wind changed. It came low at first, crawling through the cuts in the rock. Then it rose with a dry roar from the south, carrying sand hard enough to sting through cloth. Bastian stopped. He lifted one hand. Clara saw nothing but dark slope and flying grit. Then the mountain answered. A crack split somewhere high above them. Not thunder. Stone. Bastian seized her sleeve and dragged her sideways. Clara stumbled, hit her knee, rose with blood warm under her skirt. The sound grew until it filled her skull. Rock struck rock. Big pieces first, then 1,000 smaller ones hissing down the face. Bastian shoved her toward a black opening in the mountainside. Move, she tried to shout, but sand took the word. They fell into the cave together. The world came down behind them. A blast of dust punched into the hollow and blew Clara flat on her hands. Pebbles snapped against her back. The shotgun clattered away. For half a minute the mountain kept falling. Then came one last crash so deep it seemed to close the earth. After that, there was no wind, no stars, no road out. Clara pushed herself up, coughing mud from her own mouth. Her hand reached behind her and found rock where the cave mouth had been. Solid rock. She struck it with her palm. Once, twice, a third time hard enough to split skin. Nothing moved. Bastian. Her voice came back small, pressed down by stone. She crawled along the blocked wall, feeling for any crack, any draft, any mercy in the seams. Her nails bent against limestone. One tore low and wet. She kept scraping until her fingertips slid on blood and dust. Behind her, Bastian struck a match. It flared once. His face appeared. Then the match died. The dark closed so fast Clara's chest locked. She sucked in air. It came thin and cold. Too cold. The sweat on her neck chilled under her collar. Her teeth clicked before she could stop them. "We're buried," she said. No answer. She turned toward where she thought he stood. "We are buried in here." Something shifted in the dark. Clara backed into the wall. Her heel found the shotgun. She reached for it and missed. Her hand closed around loose stones instead. The debt paper flashed in her mind. On the kitchen floor. Gideon's red horse in her yard. Her mother's initials under the table. The flour gone. The last water gone. All of it traded for a hole in a dead mountain. She slid down the wall until the cold stone bit through her dress. Her breath came short, too short. She pressed both hands over her mouth, trying to hold air in, but it shook out through her fingers. Then weight settled over her shoulders. A coat, heavy wool, warm from another body, smelling of leather smoke and rain trapped long ago. Clara froze. A man's hand took hers in the dark and placed it against the stone floor. The floor trembled, not from falling rock, from something running beneath it. Then Bastian's voice came low, plain, and clean as any born American's. "Steady, Clara. We are right where we need to be." Clara did not move. The words had come from Bastian's mouth, but they did not fit the man she had followed into the dark. Not the cracked word at the town pump. Not the bent tongue Gideon had mocked. This voice was plain and steady, with the hard edge of a man who had spent years giving orders where one wrong mark could bury a crew. He struck another match. The little flame shook in his fingers. Then it steadied. Behind him, where the slide had sealed the cave mouth, a sheet of pale stone had split down the middle. Beyond it opened black space so large the match could not find its end. Clara rose slow, one hand still against the wall. "That fall opened it," Bastian said. "You speak. I do. You let them call you dumb." His eyes shifted toward the sealed mouth. Men talk free in front of what they reckon is beneath them. The match burned low. He lit a stub of candle from his coat pocket, set it in a crack, and the cave took shape by inches. Wet stone shone along the walls, not damp from seepage, running wet. Green moss clung in thick patches where no sun could reach. Thin roots hung from the ceiling, white as old thread. The air cut colder with every breath and carried the smell of iron lime and deep water. Clara looked down. The floor sloped inward. Bastian picked up the candle and started into the opening. "Stay close. The rock lies better than men, but it lies still." They moved through a narrow throat of stone, then into a chamber wide enough to hold the whole church in Red Rock Ridge. Clara's boots slipped on slick lime. Once her shoulder brushed a wall and came away wet. Then she heard it. A low sound first. Not wind, not rock. A growl under the mountain. They rounded a bend and the candle flame bent hard to one side. The chamber dropped away. Far below, a black river tore through the mountain white at its teeth where it struck stone. Cold mist rose up and touched Clara's face. She tasted snowmelt on her lips. Her hands gripped the rock ledge. Bastian crouched and held the candle low. An underground run. Fed from the North Range. Buried since the quake of '48, best I can judge. "You knew, I suspected." He reached into the water pooled near the ledge and lifted a small stone, smooth, black-gray, thick with moss. Clara's eyes went to his hand, the same kind he had laid in her trough. "I found the first one 3 days before I came into town," he said, "in a wash no Dry Valley had any right to own. After that, I listened. To whom Gideon's men, his clerk, the drunks behind the livery. They spoke of notes bought cheap, wells capped on his order, supply wagons turned back, land pressed dry till folks had to sell. The candle snapped in the draft. Clara saw Gideon's clean hat, the red gelding, the hoof tearing through the map, her jaw set until her teeth ached. "Why my land?" she asked. "Because this river wants out beneath your south pasture." Bastian pointed across the roaring dark. "The old limestone wall is thin there, but I need the outer cut. Your father worked that ridge, didn't he?" Clara's eyes lifted. "He blasted a cattle pass in '63, she said. Left powder sealed in a rock crib above the dry wash. Folks forgot it when the trail fell." Bastian looked at her then, not past her, not through her. "At first light, Gideon comes for your ranch. At first light, Clara said he can stand in my yard and watch it change hands." She took the mossy stone from him and closed it in her fist. Cold water ran down her wrist. The river roared beneath them, and for the first time Clara roared back. At sunrise, Gideon Croft stood in Clara Vale's yard with one boot on her porch step. The whole town had come to watch. Men leaned on fence rails. Women stood with shawls pulled tight, though the morning was already warming. Children peered from behind skirts. Gideon's clerk held the deed book open across both arms, the ink bottle set on Clara's own wash bench. The house door hung open behind them. Inside, the kitchen table still wore streaks of flour where the map had been. The debt paper lay on the floor, boot-marked now, its black letters smeared by dust. Gideon lifted it with 2 fingers and showed it to the crowd. "Run off," he said. Left her house, her paper, her good sense, all for a cracked stranger with no horse and no tongue fit for Christian ears. A few men laughed, but it came thin. The mossy stone still sat in the broken trough. Gideon walked to it, picked it up, and rolled it in his palm. "Here's what bought her faith," he said. "A wet rock." He tossed it into the dirt. It landed without sound. Up on Blacktooth, Clara lay belly down behind a shelf of limestone, a fuse cord between her fingers. Her lips were split from cold. Powder dust streaked one cheek. Bastian crouched beside her, one hand braced to the rock, the other holding a match cupped against the wind. Below them, Red Rock Ridge looked small enough to fit inside a hand. Clara could see her yard, the crowd, Gideon's red gelding by the gate. She could not hear his words, but she knew the shape of his mouth. Bastian looked at her. "The cut is yours," he said. Clara took the match. Her father's old powder crib had held. The kegs were dry inside their oilcloth. Bastian had set the charge where the limestone ran thin and hollow, where the river hammered against the mountain's sealed throat. The fuse waited. Clara struck the match on stone. It flared. For 1 second, the flame shook in the morning wind. Then she touched it down. The fuse caught with a hard hiss. Bastian pulled her back. They ran. The mountain opened behind them with a crack that struck the valley flat. Down in Clara's yard, the deed book fell from the clerk's hands. Gideon turned toward Blacktooth. A black seam split the high face of the mountain. Dust burst outward first, then stone. Then a white blast of water punched through the wound in the ridge and leapt into the sun. The sound came after. A roar so deep it climbed through boots and bone. The crowd staggered back from the fence. Water tore down the slope silver-white and wild, dragging loose rock, dead brush, and years of dry filth before it. It struck the old wash Clara's father had cut, filled it, climbed it, and came racing toward her south pasture like a living thing set free. Gideon backed up until his heel struck the trough. The first water hit the dry creek bed. Mud burst high. Children screamed and laughed at once. Men dropped hats. One woman sank to her knees in the dust and pressed both hands over her mouth as the stream filled, widened, and ran clear across Clara's land. The trough cracked, then filled. Cold water spilled over its sides, washing Gideon's polished boots brown. No one laughed now. From the upper trail came the sound of hooves. Clara rode down behind Bastian on her father's old dun mare, the same saddle he had carried through the flats, cinched tight beneath them. Her hands were locked in his coat, her hair torn loose, her face streaked with lime and soot. They passed through the open gate. The crowd parted without a word. Gideon's mouth opened, but no sound came worth hearing. Bastian swung down, took a hammer and nail from Clara's tool shelf, and knelt by the broken trough. Water ran around his knees as he set the split board back in place. Clara picked up the mossy stone from the mud and laid it on the porch rail. Behind her, the valley kept roaring.